Kia ora, I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Today on The Detail, a bid to break the supermarket duopoly fails.
Online grocer Supie has gone out of business today, owing about $3 million. The Auckland-based independent virtual supermarket's gone into voluntary administration.
The blow to customers and to competition in the supermarket sector.
It's a really disappointing development for competition in this industry. We are crying out for more players in the supermarket industry to take on the duopoly.
First off, I'd say it's a sad day for Kiwi entrepreneurs when they can't get their project to the other side of it.
Founder Sarah Ball told us she's devastated, saying, "Together we fought so hard to introduce competition in the market so that Kiwis could get a fairer deal for their groceries."
Was the formula all wrong? Was it too soon? Or are we just too lazy to change our habits? Well, just yesterday, the outstanding wages owed to 120 staff who lost their jobs were paid by an anonymous donor. But hundreds of creditors, including suppliers and customers, are out of pocket. Here's Jonathan Milne, Managing Editor of Newsroom Pro.
A key investor came to her and said, "Sorry, I can't follow through with the $3 million buy-in that I was looking to do. I don't think your numbers stack up." And there were some people who weren't surprised. I talked to Sam Stubbs yesterday from Simplicity. So Simplicity obviously manages KiwiSaver funds. He said, "We were approached at the last minute and asked if we wanted to take part in this capital raise. We had a look at the books and we liked what they did. We loved Sarah's vision, but we didn't think they could survive." He said, "And I could not, in good conscience, to the members of our KiwiSaver funds, invest their money into a business we thought was going to fail." And he was right, of course.
Who is Sarah Ball?
She started pretty much from scratch. I mean, she comes from an MBR rich list family.
I grew up on a vegetable farm in Pukekohe. My parents, brothers and sisters are still vegetable growers today or involved in the business. And I was just shocked to see how much fruit and vegetables that are grown in New Zealand end up in food waste.
Good on you. But she seems to have mostly done this on her own. In fact, I was listening into an investor's report in which she was asked about just this, and the fellow investor said, "Hey, can we get some more cash flow into the company from your family, please?" And she said, "No, we don't really work like that as a family. We do our own thing. It's a big family. Everyone's got their own interests. And no, I'm not going to go to my uncles and aunts and ask them to all shell out to bail out Supie." She lives in South Auckland, at home with her parents. She'd be well into her 30s, I think. She borrows her mum's car because she sold her car in order to help fund Supie. So she's kind of chucked everything she's got into this business. But it's grown very rapidly. The rapid growth has actually been one of the big challenges for it, because they just haven't been able to get enough cash investment to keep up with their demand. They're getting so many members, and they've had a lot of publicity, obviously, through Sarah's profile in the Commerce Commission inquiry into the groceries sector, where she's been a very robust critic of the supermarkets.
In reality, and having been working in this industry for some time now, and knowing that for more than a decade we've had really poor outcomes, we haven't had meaningful competition, which is what the Commerce Commission found a couple of years ago. But now we know that regulation hasn't solved it. Everyone keeps talking about Aldi and other internationals coming here, and they could have. We've got Costco, but they're not delivering lower prices at the checkout for all Kiwis. They're just going to go into the main centres.
But because of that profile, because of effective marketing, because they're a likeable enough business model, they have had a big uptake. I mean, they've been pushing up towards 100,000 members, but they just haven't got enough money to build the infrastructure, to keep the supplies coming in, to deliver them at the rate they needed to, and that was where they ran into problems. It wasn't future revenues, but it was immediate cash flow.
And did it have anything to do with the cost of everything at the moment? The high cost of everything? I'm talking about groceries, fruit and veg.
While Sarah Ball would have downplayed that and probably presented that as roughly neutral for the company because people have to pay more for their food wherever they go. However, I think the reality is that in this really tough competitive environment, she did not have access to such good prices for supplies as the big supermarkets did. So she could never match their prices on key goods. Despite being based in South Auckland, she's never going to get that mass market. She's never going to compete with the pack and saves. They're always going to be cheaper. That's something that the government had tried to address as part in response to the Commerce Commission inquiry into the supermarket sector. And Sarah was always dubious about their solution. Their solution was to require the supermarkets to open up their wholesale distribution network to small independents. And we're talking about dairies, we're talking about greengrocers, we're talking about the Supies of the world. Sarah Ball's view was always that this only strengthened the supermarkets' hand by forcing all the independents to go to the supermarkets to get their supplies. She was in a slightly different position because she had, over the course of 3 or 4 years, managed to negotiate a lot of direct supply agreements with companies like, she had a meat agreement with Hallaby's, for instance. She had a direct agreement with Fonterra. But a lot of those agreements were at a higher price point than what they were charging the big supermarkets. The supermarkets got the clout to demand lower prices from suppliers. A smaller business like Supie doesn't have that same kind of negotiating clout. And so what Sarah Ball told me was happening was she was forced to do direct agreements with companies like Fonterra, like Mars, the big, which isn't just confectionery, it's not just chocolate bars, but all kinds of food products, Dolmio, Pet Foods, Ben's Rice. She did direct deals with them. Often they had intermediaries. Everyone was clipping the ticket along the way, and she was having to pay more for the products than the supermarkets would have. And what that meant was that, of course, her customers had to pay more. So that's a very long way of answering your question.
Yeah. The owner of Christchurch manufacturer Cactus Clothing, Ben Keeps, is an investor and was a director of Supie until he stood down last week before the shock news. When you took on the role as a director of Supie, what did you see in the company? What did you see as its potential?
I think as an investor or as a board member of early stage companies, it's actually a very simple calculus. Is this a problem that needs to be solved? And is there an individual or a team here who you think can execute? Many people have commented on the problem to solve here, i.e. the lack of competition in the grocery sector. And I will also say that despite the fact that Supie eventually had a sad demise, Sarah Ball is an exceptional founder who moved heaven and earth to achieve what she did and frankly got further in competing with the duopoly than anyone has ever gotten before.
She did, but in the end failed. So what's wrong here?
There's a bunch of structural stuff going on. There is a lack of competition. The duopoly have the biggest footprint. They have leverage and control over suppliers. But the other thing I would say is it's really easy for us to blame the man or the woman, as it were. But I think we as a society need to look at ourselves. And the fact of the matter is that in the areas that Supie operated, we were regularly found to be cheaper than the duopoly, and yet people kind of did their normal going to the supermarket thing. And so change happens because people get out there, initiatives get out there and market, but change also happens because we embrace those opportunities. And so I'm not going to say that Supie's demise was the fault of consumers, not at all. But I think that if we want competition in the marketplace, we need to support competitive initiatives.
But then I do wonder, what does it take? Because is it correct that there were 100,000 users?
I haven't got the exact figures, but about 80,000 people on our list. But I think what's it going to take? Tex Edwards has been very public saying it's going to take someone with hundreds of millions of dollars.
Real competition is going to refocus attention on what actually the sustainable business case of a challenger is going to be. That's $1 billion of capital. It's not 10 or 20.
Coming in and providing, essentially a sort of a like-for-like service, the way he did with 2 Degrees to try and compete with Vodafone as it was then and Telecom as it was then. Our thesis was that you could do things differently. You could be an online provider with a lower sort of cost of entry, and that would be competitive and that would get to scale. We failed. I don't think that means that the only way to succeed is for someone to come in with hundreds of millions of dollars, but time will tell what it takes to get real competition in the grocery market in New Zealand.
I just wonder if that model of food delivery really is the way to go, or is this just about scale?
I think if you take a step back, right, Is it more efficient for all of us as individual consumers to get in our little cars, drive to a big supermarket, do our shopping and then drive home versus, a centralised distribution centre ordering online and stuff going out to us? I mean, I would suggest that the latter is more efficient in the same way that, Trade Me has meant that a lot of people don't need to go to the hardware store to buy things. So over the fullness of time, I think Amazon has proven that online can work. It's probably a conversation for another day. Were we too early? Was the New Zealand market ready to do online? What were timing failings versus execution failings? There's a bunch of stuff to unpick, and that'll happen in the coming weeks and months and years.
What about the suggestion that perhaps the government should step in and forcibly break up the big supermarket chains?
I'm no expert on government intervention. What I would say is that relying upon the government to resolve market issues can, I would suggest, have lots of sort of unintended consequences. We've got a grocery commissioner now. Comcom introduced the wholesale buying regime, and there were a bunch of things that came from that weren't good and didn't help with competition. So I think it's a balance between the market providing the solution and the regulator providing the solution. But again, I come back to the point that fundamentally we, the consumers, have the biggest potential impact to make with our buying decisions.
So what will it take to break the duopoly and get real competition into the market and therefore lower prices? Here's Tex Edwards again, the entrepreneur who set up 2 Degrees and a warrior in the competition sector. He says the government has to fix it.
They have to understand what it would take to break up the existing cartel, force the sale of approximately 100 to 120 supermarkets to a third player, and force the sale of some of the distribution centres, which is where the problem lies.
Jonathan Milne says there are other ideas.
Matthew Lane from Night and Day, and this is hard to believe, but Night and Day, which isn't big on most of our radars, but Night and Day, I would say, is a little convenience store chain. Yet, as it turns out, it's actually, in terms of a number of outlets, the 3rd biggest grocery supplier in New Zealand, which just shows how massively in control, how massively dominant the 2 big Woolworths and foodstuffs chains are, that you have to go that far to find the 3rd place, because they're just, Night and Day's just got 50 convenience stores dotted around the country, and they're hardly a serious competitor to the supermarkets. But his belief was that rather than selling off retail stores, the supermarkets needed to be required to separate themselves vertically. And what he's talking about there is that both the supermarkets have chains right from the producer right through to the consumer checkout. They control the whole chain from woe to go. There's very little wholesale that's available to independent retailers. That is why when you queue up at Pack and Save or Countdown and there's someone in front of you with an enormous supermarket trolley stacked to the gunnels with bottled water and toilet paper and other basics, that's your corner dairy owner, because they are forced to buy at retail prices from the supermarkets because there is no wholesale chain for them to access. Even the wholesalers are owned by Foodstuffs and Countdowns. So Matthew Lane from Night and Day, his argument is that we split up that vertical structure. We split the wholesalers from the logistics. We split the wholesalers from the retailers, so that independent retailers can access the wholesale at competitive prices. And the government's gone some step towards that. They've set up a wholesale distribution network in which the supermarkets are challenged to supply groceries at competitive prices to independents. And the government said, if you don't do that, we're going to come down with a big heavy stick and we're going to impose a wholesale code of conduct and regulate the hell out of you, and got the Commerce Commission to set the prices that you can charge at wholesale. Nobody likes that idea. So the supermarkets are having a go at that.
So option 1 is to break up the actual supermarkets. Option 2 is to split the retailers from the wholesalers. There is a third option recommended by the Commerce Commission and favoured by Supie's Sarah Ball.
Yeah, I mean, government funding has delivered us a national airline, being Air New Zealand. It has delivered us rural broadband to areas across New Zealand so that we don't have internet poverty. We have government-funded electricity companies. So there's absolutely a case to be made to ensure that we don't have food poverty in New Zealand. The government is investing in a supermarket that generates returns that we can pour back into supporting food producers and really improving the health of our population.
Basically, the government's setting up a Kiwi grocer, for want of a better name, in competition, and that would also provide wholesale to independents. So there's 3 scenarios. They're all really expensive and ambitious options, and I think they're too hard for any government, Labour or National. In particular, the structural options of forcing them to sell off stores or forcing them to separate their vertical logistics and wholesale and retail chains, I think that actually poses real problems in terms of property rights. And some people will say, well, my heart bleeds for these big, wealthy, rich Lister supermarket owners. You take the Foodstuffs, New Worlds and Foursquare owners, a lot of them are intergenerational. They own their supermarket. They've built it up over generations, some of them. And to say, well, actually, sorry, we're going to force you to sell it because we need to let in a competitor, that does pose real property rights issues. And you know what it would do to overseas investors, and we need overseas investors for New Zealand, it would look and say, my gosh, here's a government that will forcibly take my property off me, will forcibly divest, make me sell off my own assets. I don't want to be anywhere near this country. I'm going to go and invest my money in Bolivia instead. I do have one other option which the government hasn't yet looked at, but I understand that Sarah Ball has been in talks with officials about MSD food grants, which is an enormous sum, and most of that money goes to the existing big supermarket chain. So that's millions of dollars at least. She's also been looking at Te Whatu Ora, which supports green prescriptions, which is a prescription to eat healthier. So what if those prescriptions could be redeemed at small independent retailers rather than just at Pack and Save and New Worlds? And we're not talking about slanting the procurement rules to cut the big players out, but just to make sure that they're fair to the small players, fair to the independents. And I wonder, for Nicola Willis, who has said that if she's finance minister, she wants to address this problem, I wonder if that's a slightly more elegant solution for her than taking on the supermarket chains with a big hammer.
But no strong third player in the market.
So the warehouse is gradually increasing its involvement in the grocery market, but it's still not competition for the supermarkets. The outgoing Labour government had pinned its hopes on getting some big international chains to expand here. They've been talking to Costco, they've been talking to Aldi, both of which have strong presences in Australia. Now, Costco, of course, has opened a big warehouse in West Auckland, but at most it might open one more in Christchurch. That doesn't help anyone outside those 2 cities. Aldi, despite the approaches of Finance Minister Grant Robertson, has shown no interest in crossing the Tasman. So I don't think we can rely on big international saviours to swing in and deliver us competition. And it's really, really, really hard for a local player, especially one with no serious existing footprint, to put together enough capital to expand. The one slim possibility are iwi consortiums, and there are a couple of iwi consortiums that are interested, that are relatively well financed, capitalised, that see an important public interest and an important interest for their people in ensuring the availability of good and affordable healthy food to the communities. So they're pretty well motivated, but they would need to team up with some serious grocery sector expertise. They still need to access useful blocks of land on which to build their bricks and mortar supermarkets. And you really cannot underestimate the cost. Costco spent $150 million opening in West Auckland. That's one store. So in order to have a real impact nationwide, you need to be opening in every town. I couldn't even begin to put a dollar figure on that.
Would you ever want to invest in this sector again? I mean, you've taken a lot of risks, with the manufacturing sector.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, I'm personally pretty bruised. I mean, that's not to understate the impact on other investors and especially staff and those sorts of things. I would absolutely back Sarah Ball again. I think I probably need to take a breather and lick my wounds a little bit in terms of early stage investing. You know, at the end of the day, it sounds trite to say it's not about money because, you know, I understand that I'm in a privileged position. But, you know, frankly, my reason for investing and joining the board was working alongside an exceptional founder and trying to make a dent in a broken market in New Zealand, and ultimately we didn't succeed, but I am proud of what was achieved over the years.
Are there any similarities, Ben, between the supermarket sector and the clothing manufacturing sector?
Yeah, so I think maybe you're identifying that I'm a glutton for punishment. There are. It's really hard to compete with big players. There are some fundamental moves, i.e. consolidation and going to lowest common denominator that we're seeing in the grocery sector, and that has happened in the clothing sector. But I think, I guess if I take a step backwards, at Supie we were helping New Zealanders feed themselves. At Cactus we're helping New Zealanders get the strongest and most reliable clothes and packs and stuff on the planet. That's important work, and so in terms of satisfaction at the end of the day, if I can come home and I've been involved in something that does something fundamental that's kind of right there on the base level of people's necessity for food and clothing, then that feels good, I guess.
Did you invest a sizable chunk into Supie?
I mean, this isn't about my money. I'm lucky that I've been fortunate and I'm in a comfortable position, so I'm aware of my privilege. I put some money in. The directors didn't get paid director fees, and did a bunch of work for free. So I've lost out on this one, the same as other investors have lost out. But this isn't about my loss. This is about the lost opportunity to New Zealand Inc., the suppliers that are hard done by, the customers that are hard done by, and especially the staff, the 120 odd staff who have been hard done by, unfortunately.
That's it for today. I'm Sharon Brett-Kelly. The Detail is supported by the Public Interest Journalism Fund. Today's episode was engineered by Phil Benge. Our producers are Mark Jennings and Bonnie Harrison. And thanks to Jonathan Milne and Ben Keeps. Ka kite.